Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is GW. I'm here. I'm back. I'm happy to be doing this. I'm excited to be doing another one of these. It's going to be a long afternoon as I go through this, but this is an important week. This is the week that college football starts. Now, you might notice my voice is a little raspy. I wish I could say it was because I was at the game and I was rooting, I was cheering, but that's not true. I'm not really sure why it's raspy, but it is, and it's going to be worse than normal, I guess, for a while. So bear with me on this. So, college football. So, how many people have been watching college football all their life? I'm one. I'm one. My parents were University of Oklahoma graduates, and they were longtime friends. And of course, the University of Oklahoma has always been good in football, so they tend to get on TV a lot. So there was two or three times a year that we'd be able to root on Oklahoma and sing Boomer Sooner in the house, which didn't seem strange if you were living in Oklahoma City. But we were living in Iowa, and so it was a little strange for the people up there. You have to look at the area that you live in and you say, okay, you're going to root for the people that and the teams that are in that area. If it's pro sports, you're going to root for the pros. If it's college sports, well, you're going to root for the college team. Now, some of them areas, you tend to have one set of teams that kind of overpowers the rest. And, well, Washington, D.C. was an example of that. You had the Washington, at that time, Redskins, now the Commanders. Commanders just doesn't roll off my tongue somehow. I'm sorry. But you had the Washington Commanders. And at the time, this was pre Daniel Snyder, they were really, really the team that everybody followed in the town. And I don't mean just followed, I mean the town slowed down. I mean, this is the national capital. These are people from all over the country who are gathering there. But when the Redskins were playing, the Commanders were playing, the town slowed down. It was an exciting time to be there. I also lived in a town in Kearney, Nebraska. I lived there for 3 years, and worked at the University of Nebraska at Kearney when I was there. And when University of Nebraska, not the University of Nebraska Kearney Antelopes, but when the University of Nebraska, the Cornhuskers, when they played, the entire state slowed down. You would go into places and you couldn't get waited on because the game was on the TV, and everyone, including the wait staff, was paying attention to the TV. Very interesting as you went through there. The dynamic of how much power those teams had in those particular areas when you had that. It was just amazing to watch, amazing to live through. But in my life, I, I rooted for Oklahoma because my parents did. I rooted for Iowa and Iowa State because I grew up in Iowa. So you root for the town, the teams that you grew up with. You have to. Yeah, there's no way around it. I lived in Atlanta for 3 years. When I lived in Atlanta, I rooted for the Atlanta Falcons. I rooted for the Atlanta Braves. And I was a big fan. I rooted at that time. At that time, they had a hockey team, not the same one they have today. They didn't have NBA basketball at that time, but I rooted for the teams that were in the town, and I enjoyed it. But when I moved away, that allegiance slowed down rapidly. I followed them for a year or so because I still was conveniently familiar with the players. So I was able, not knowing them personally, of course, but knowing who the players were on the teams and, some of the dynamics that was going on. But when you don't live in the town, you don't hear that stuff. You can't follow that stuff. It's really hard to follow a team from a distance. And particularly in those days, I mean, it's much easier today with the internet and being able to get feeds of, oh my gosh, let me know what happened. I I worked with a guy who was a big fan of Georgia, and he had a feed on his phone that he would get beeped every time Georgia had, I think every time they had a cup of coffee with some high school kid, and he would sit there and go, "Oh." They're talking to another four-star. And he would get all excited. I truly would get all excited. And it was, in all honesty, it was hard to live with because I honestly could care less. And, but you try to be nice and you show some interest. But it was really hard. It was really hard. So you have all these areas. Now, I'm currently living in Tennessee. You have the Volunteers, you have the Titans. You have these teams that you do, but you have the Volunteers. But yet, in the town I'm living in, you have Vanderbilt, and the Vanderbilt Commodores is an SEC team just like Tennessee is, except they're just not as good. They're not as well funded. They don't have the same amount of money that you can throw at them. But yet, in many ways, they're more of a national team than they are a state team. Tennessee Volunteers, Rocky Top, they're the state team. Still, I've lived here for 12 years. It's still hard to get overly excited about that. I still get more excited about an Iowa game than I do a Tennessee game. It's really too bad, but that's the way it is, at least for me. You almost have to choose today which conference it is that you're going to be rooting for. I mean, this is a year of big, big changes in the way the NCAA is playing football. And some conferences are just about to cease to exist. And you have the Big Ten that is now, I think, has 16 or 17 teams in it. And you have the SEC that also has 16, 18 teams in it. I don't even know the exact numbers. It used to be that when you said Big Ten, it had 10 teams. It used to be that when you talked about the Big Eight conference, it had 8 teams. There was a reason why they called it the Big Eight and the Big Ten. But now, you don't know how many teams they actually have. So you have these conferences that are so much different. But even though I live in the Southeast Conference, the area, geographic area, and you can't put, if you don't live here, I don't think you understand the intensity of the football, just wanting to have the football, and be the best. The intensity is really strong down here. But I'll always be a Big Ten guy. Grew up in the Big Ten world, always look at those as being, just solid programs and teams. And they're bringing in so many teams from a whole different area of the country. It's going to be interesting to see how this works out. So if you're listening to this, what have you taken away from this? Well, I think you've taken away that I know very little about football. I know very little about any individual teams. Most of those teams that I've mentioned, I couldn't even tell you, who the head coach. I certainly couldn't tell you who the offensive coordinator or the defensive coordinator was. I couldn't tell you, in most of the cases, I couldn't tell you who the quarterback, and I couldn't name two people, who played on that particular team. Do I root for the teams any less because I have this lack of knowledge? No. I continue to root for them just like I know what I'm talking about. Do I join in conversations? Well, I got to tell you, I know guys who follow religiously a very small group of teams. And some of them follow religiously a very large group of teams. They really know what's going on. They, in all honesty, I'll sit there and talk to them and say a couple of comments maybe, but then I will shut my mouth and I will listen to them. And, maybe I'll pick up something that I'll go to a conversation and I'll have something to say about it. But the bottom line is, it's big, big efforts. College football is huge. College football is important to the psyche of America. And I don't think people really give it the credit that it deserves for what it really does, because it allows people who are having major difficulties with other parts of the world right now, with other parts of the landscape here inside the United States, having major difficulties with how can this happen? How can that happen? How can we? And they can come together on college football. They can come together on a game and they can sit there at the end of the game. And for the most part, they can sit there and they can say, the refs, gosh, they weren't the best, but they tried and they got most of it right. And you just hope that they get, more of it right next time. So college football, an important part for this country. All football is. So that's really all I got to say today. I hope you enjoyed this. Please follow. I'm GW. I do this every few days. I'll put out whatever it is that's crossing my mind. I think it's important. Well, actually, in all honesty, I don't. But, I hope that, you all enjoyed this and keep listening because every little while I'll put one of these things out. Thank you much. Really appreciate all the help.